Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today for our wonderful webinar in our Kinship series. Today, we're looking at deep listening to nature, and in just a moment, I'll introduce our guest speakers. Before I do that, I would like to acknowledge country. I'd like to acknowledge that I live, work, and play on the very beautiful lands of the Cubby Cubby peoples. I live north of Brisbane, and where I live, work, and play is Cubby Cubby country. And where I look out upon the Glasshouse Mountains, it's actually Jinnaburra country. So I live in southeast Queensland, and it's a truly beautiful, marvellous, magical part of the world. I'd like to acknowledge elders past and present, and the ongoing legacy of caring for country and caring for kin that the first peoples of this country have been responsible for since time immemorial. I'd invite all of you to perhaps chat right in the chat where you are, whose country you're on today. And as always, we'd like to invite you to just spend a few seconds pondering an evolutionary companion that you might have seen this morning, a creature or a plant or something in the natural world that has brought joy and wonder and happiness to you. So have a little think about that, puts us in the right frame of mind. For anyone who knows what I love all creatures, but I have a particular fondness for blue-banded bees, and I'm delighted to say I did see one of the fuzzy little creatures buzzing in my flowers this morning, so that's delightful. So yes, acknowledging country to us is very important. We also, within the Australian Earth Laws Alliance, like to acknowledge our ongoing commitment to playing a humble role in the decolonising of the way we think about country, the way we think about other people, and the way that we care for this beautiful continent that we're so lucky to live on. And if you're joining us from another continent or place, please do pop that in the chat too, and welcome everyone. So before I introduce our speakers, for those who don't know much about the Australian Earth Laws Alliance, or AILA, we're a small not-for-profit, and we have basically been around for about a decade. What we're profoundly passionate about is helping to increase the knowledge, understanding, and practical implementation of Earth-centred everything. Earth-centred governance is really the area that we like to focus on. We're interested in how non-Indigenous Australia and Western industrialised societies in particular can rethink our relationship with the living world, and not only have a personal, deeper relationship with the living world, but change the systems of our entire modern governance. And we talk about economics, law, politics, education. Many of the content issues that are covered in Earth jurisprudence, in a critique of industrialised societies, that's the areas that we're interested in, that we work in. And that brings me to our wonderful Kinship webinar series. And I'd like to acknowledge our co-hosts of this series, the UTS, University of Technology Sydney, Transdisciplinary School. We work with a number of wonderful colleagues at the UTS, TDS, that's a lot of letters. Really want to acknowledge their support for these ongoing discussions. So without further ado from me, I'd now like to introduce our wonderful speakers. Excuse me. So today we're joined by three wonderful humans. I'll introduce Andrew Skeoch first. Andrew is one of Australia's best-known nature sound recordists, is an acoustic ecologist and author of Deep Listening to Nature, a truly inspirational book based on his decades of connecting with and listening to the living world. We've worked with Andrew for many years now, and every single time I hear Andrew talk or share some of his recordings and his insights and learnings from nature, I'm always inspired and really touched by our connections to nature, but also what we can learn from the deep listening to nature. Also want to introduce Professor Benny Wilson. Benny is a Yagara man who has worked in the tertiary sector since 2015. His expertise includes indigenising the curricula, assisting non-Indigenous academic colleagues to embed Indigenous ways of knowing into their work. And he's also interested in the intersection between narrative and place-based education systems. In 2022, Benny was named as the ACT Scholar of the Year at the ACT NAIDOC Awards. And in 2023, he was awarded the Neville Bonner Award for Indigenous Education at the Australian Awards for University Teaching. Last but definitely not least, I'd like to introduce Monty Nixon. Monty is a PhD student exploring how Indigenous ways of being, knowing, and doing can lead education systems to help people come to know, understand, and care for the places they love. And I know Monty and Benny have worked together, are connected in their work, and they'll be sharing their time and space today in their talks. So what I might do first is Monty and Benny are going to set the scene with a bit of an introduction. So I'm just going to spotlight them. Actually, my system is, please hold. There he is. Monty and Benny, how are you today? Oh, you're on mute. Oh, no, very good.
Really, really well. Thank you, Michelle. And thanks for that lovely introduction.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Well, thanks, Michelle. So to start us off today, we thought we'd start with a story. So this is a story that is told from this particular place on Yuggabal country. So in the photo here, you can see a mountain, and that mountain is Mount Murrin, which is Goanna. We like to pronounce it Maroon as Westerners, often liking to whack a bit of emphasis somewhere, but the old word is Murrin, which is Goanna. And at the foot of Murrin, you can see a little school, Mount Maroon Outdoor Education Centre. So this is a story that comes from this particular place, but it was a story that was told widely across Australia. And as we tell with this story, it's a message that I think is relevant for starting our talk today, and guides what we're going to talk about. So one day, a group of Year 2-3 students from that education centre sat at the foot of Jumbal, the hoop pine. You can see a photo of Jumbal there. And as they were sitting in the shade, they finished their calculations. They'd figured out, using some trigonometry that is well beyond my capability, that Jumbal was about 200 years old, which was significant because it meant that when Jumbal was just a sapling, it predated Europeans walking that country. And as they were sitting in there in the shade, enjoying being outside, having finished their mathematics for the day, the teacher started telling a story. And although it was a story that he'd heard right across Australia in many different forms, it started flowing through him. And our old people teach us that when that happens, that's a story that belongs to our earthkin, to our ancestors, to Jumbal. And so this is that story. So one day, when Jumbal was just a sapling, it rained. And with that rain came life and spirit. So that rain fell on Murrin the Goanna, trickling into creeks and into the soil. And as it did so, it mixed with that soil to help grass grow and to help Jumbal grow. And so the life and the spirit of the rain and the soil became grass and Jumbal. Along came a young male kangaroo, and he nibbled at that grass and he nibbled at Jumbal. And so the life and the spirit of the rain and the soil and the grass and Jumbal all became part of that young male kangaroo. Further along that creek, a woman with a baby in her belly went down to have a drink of water. And on her way back to the camp, to the fire, she collected some yams and some berries. And then when she arrived at that fire, the father of that child, had gone and hunted that young male kangaroo, giving thanks for his life and spirit. And so they sat around that fire, sharing yams and berries and that young male kangaroo. And as they did that, the life and spirit of the rain and the soil and the grass and Jumbal and that young male kangaroo, the yams and the berries, all became part of that little girl. Now, when she was born, she grew up knowing that she was made of the same stuff as the world around her, that she was connected and had family ties with everyone around her, that Jumbal was her grandfather, that the earth was her mother, the kangaroos were her brothers and her sisters. She knew that she was country, and so was everyone else around her. This was an old story that Western science has finally caught up with. So, Western science finally, about 100 years ago, And jump in here, Benny, if you want to add anything in as well, brother. But Western science finally caught up and can tell us a very similar story. So humans are primarily composed of water. About 70% of us is water. And the rest of us, when I ask this question, people kind of give me lots of different answers. Muscles, brains, bones, but primarily the backbone is carbon, dirt, earth. So what Western science also teaches us is that all we are is country with water. And how many of those water molecules are unique to us? Less than 1%, a very, very tiny amount, apparently, which means that all that water, which was replaced every 4 to 6 weeks, has not only been in us, but also has fallen from the sky as rain, hail, sleet, and snow, especially if you live in the high country here, where it gets a bit chillier, has been in many different ancestors, in kangaroo, in grass, in jumbo. It's not unique to us. So both of these stories tell us that as humans, we are profoundly interconnected with the world around us, that we are deeply bound. So I reflect on these two different tellings of the same story. In one story, the Western scientific story, they all know we know we're profoundly connected and deeply interwoven with the world around us. We have an education system that primarily still puts humans at the center. It's still a system about human endeavor and growing human achievement. Whereas that story for that young girl who would have grown up knowing that kangaroos were her brothers and sisters and Jumbo was her grandfather would have learned a different story, one more like this circle, where humans are a part of a much bigger family, a bigger collective. I'd add here that, that system that that little girl engaged with is one that was across the globe. Robin Wall Kimmerer, from over in America, talks about the first education system of her people as recognizing humans as the youngest brothers of creation. And that as they were the youngest, they had the most to learn. And who should they learn it from? But the world around them. This is the education system that has been in Australia for a very, very, very long time. And the work that Benny and I do is about trying to return to that way of knowing, to return to that way of learning, because it helps provide ecological balance and teaches us humans how we need to live in a way that cares for the world around us.
So thanks, brother. So you'll notice two things about what Monty just said then. The first thing is that when we tell these ways of being, this is what Monty and I have been taught, what we've learned, what we've researched, what we believe. We're not arrogant enough to say that we speak on behalf of all Aboriginal people, but this is a profoundly Indigenous way of being that we were taught by our grandfathers, uncles, and brothers out on various country. The second thing, though, that's really significant for this work, as we're about to pass on to Andrew, is you'll notice that when Monty told that yarn about all of us being country, he didn't ask all the Indigenous people to put up their hands and then say, well, your country and we're country. Don't know what your white fellas are, because that's simply not true. That is never what black fellas have told each other for thousands and thousands of years. If you're born to this country and you're on this country, you've taken its water and its dirt into your body, you've become this country. Doesn't matter what color you are. So this is a profoundly Indigenous way of being, but it's not an exclusively Indigenous way of being. This is for all of us, and that's why we're here talking with you today. Is that cool, Monty? All right, we'll pass over to Andrew, eh?
Okay, thank you so much. I will now spotlight Andrew. But Andrew, please do speak up so I can find you.
Yep, here I am.
There you
hiding over
are.
in the corner.
You are. We're all hiding in the corners with a meeting this large. Thank you so much for joining us, Andrew. You should be able to share screen and share your wonderful presentation. Thank you so much.
Well, look, firstly, thank you very much, Michelle, for initiating this this session today, and for those words of yours, Benny. I often feel, having not had a great deal of engagement with Aboriginal people, that I'm a bit of I'm sort of trying to work things out as a white fella. And what really amazes me is the synchronicities, the parallels between the way that I'm trying to understand the world and the way that I hear Indigenous people, not just in this country, but all around the world, expressing their connection to country. So thank you very much for those last words. Alrighty, let's see if we can do a little bit of screen sharing here. Boom, ba-doom, ba-doom, ba-doo. Okay, is that coming up okay?
All good.
Now, the next part of it is there is a bit of audio playing with this. Can everyone hear that okay?
Beautiful.
Lovely. Thank you. So what you're listening to at the moment is a soundscape of this place. This is a highland forest in southeast Australia. And I've been privileged to travel around the world recording in these pristine types of locations. And when I do so, I'm hearing a lot of species vocalizing. And each species is vocalizing in a unique way, and those vocalizations support the life of that species. They have a communicative purpose. So I hear nature telling me stories. I'm hearing species each having a unique story in the way that they vocalize and communicate. And when I'm in an ecosystem like this, I'm hearing the whole ecosystem telling me a story about how it functions. I've also been lucky to travel around the world and record not only a huge diversity of species, but in many different ecosystems. And one of the things that I've come to is a realization that as much as nature speaks in so many different voices, it also speaks in just one voice. And that is the voice of our planet and the way that nature functions, the way that the biosphere functions. So if I could try and describe the way, or summarize the way that the planet functions, I think this sums it up really nicely. Nature generates the essential conditions supportive of life. Nature generates the essential conditions supportive of life. So what are those conditions? Nature does it in so many different ways, but I want to focus on just three of them. And it comes from psychology. These three come from psychology. Psychologists speak of three essential conditions necessary for a child to grow up well and to thrive. And they are safety, security, and to be seen and heard. If a child has all three of these, it will feel loved. Take away any one, and a child will be compromised in the way that it grows up. So these are three essential conditions that we require to live. And I feel that nature, in the way that it functions, actually mirrors these three, embodies these three qualities. And that's what I'd like to talk about. The first of them, safety. To begin this story, it's the story of the grey shrike thrush. And shrikes are beautiful birds. They've got soft grey plumage and lovely tonal voices, really rich, almost flute-like. And if you have them living where you do, and shrike thrushes exist around the country, so you may well do. If you listen to them, you'll hear them singing a variety of song phrases, a particular a repertoire of different song types. And for me, I hear them singing about 24 different songs. And I hear them singing in the dawn chorus, and it's the dawn chorus that I want to contextualize this shrike thrush story. The dawn chorus is that festival of birdsong that you hear in the morning in the twilight before the sun rises. By the time the sun actually rises, we're into the day. the diurnal singing repertoires and behaviours of various birds. But in that first twilight hour, they do something special. They sing differently in different ways and with different repertoire. And each species sings in its own particular way. So I would be hearing the grey shrike thrush singing, and I'm listening to it and I'm thinking, it's doing something interesting, but I couldn't quite work out what it was. So for 1 week, I put out my microphones to record the birds that live around our house. And I'm going to talk you through just one of those mornings and tell you what I heard the shrike thrush doing. Firstly, the dawn chorus began in the dark with magpies singing, and incidentally, the dawn chorus, different species of birds sing in a sequence in the dawn chorus. It's one of the things that tells you that the dawn chorus is special. So the magpies had been singing in the dark, then the kookaburras kicked up, and that's one family triggering another, and they call backwards and forwards amongst each other, and that's generally a sign that the dawn chorus is about to start. Then early species singing were fantails, robins, fairy wrens. Then all the honeyeaters began singing. They roost collectively and all begin singing as a small community. It was about half an hour before the first shrike thrush sang. And when it did, it was the bird that lives immediately around our house. And from its repertoire of about 24 different song phrases, it sung out a single song phrase. And then it waited for a response. And it didn't get one, so it sung it again and waited and sung it again. It was around 2 minutes before the neighbouring shrike thrush that lives about 100 metres away also began singing. And the two birds fell into a pattern of singing which is called counter singing, which is where two neighbouring birds, rather than singing randomly or trying to sing over the top of each other or something, they take turns. They sing backwards and forwards, and these two shrike thrushes did it beautifully, alternating their calls. But what really amazed me was that out of its repertoire of around 24 song phrases, the neighbouring shrike thrush sung exactly the same song phrase as our bird. Is that coming through okay? Can everyone hear that? And by the way, this is a spectrogram, what you're seeing on screen. It's a visual representation of the sound. So it shows you the structure of the sound. They're a lot of fun to look at and work with. But you can hear that these two birds are alternating their songs and they're both singing the same song phrase. This carried on for about 15 minutes and then something interesting happened. The neighbouring bird suddenly sung a completely different song. Immediately, our bird picked up on the new song, and within about half a minute or so, no, it's more like about a minute, all the birds that I could hear within earshot, all the shrike thrushes began singing this second new song phrase. And you can hear some birds way off in the distance there. There's quite a community of shrike thrushes across the landscape, and they were all singing the same song. Another 15 minutes or so, and some interesting things happened. Our bird tried to initiate a new song phrase, but a magpie sung at exactly the same moment, and it didn't get heard. So it tried a second time, singing a new phrase, but the magpie sung again. And at that point, it gave up and it went back to singing the same song that everyone else was. But by this stage, the whole dawn chorus was ebbing away, subsiding, dissipating, and shrike thrushes were among the last ones left singing. You could hear them way off in the distance, over a kilometre away. And from there, I could hear that a new song had been introduced, and it was like a Mexican wave. It was just rippling through the whole community until once again, within a minute or so, everybody was singing this third new song. There was a half-hearted attempt to get a fourth song going, but it was, you could, we're all finished for the morning. Let's go and have some breakfast. There are several things going on in this bird's dawn singing behavior. The first is that they're counter singing. And when birds are counter singing, you know, we think in the dawn chorus, all these birds are singing at dawn, but actually they're doing something else. They're listening. So neighboring birds, as well as singing, they're listening to each other. They have to get this counter singing. And that listening is a form of acknowledgement. They're acknowledging their neighbours. Then they're singing so as to affirm their home range, where they live, so that they can each hear their space in the landscape where they live. And that's a kind of respect as well, that I respect your home range, and you respect mine. Then they're singing the same song phrase. And when you have the same song, you have the same sonic identity. So a community of birds can emerge out of singing and affirming their belonging to a community through singing the same song. But these shrike thrushes are doing something else. I can't help listening to this without feeling as though they are playing a kind of sound game, because they've got to be following the process. They've got to be following the state of play. And so we're actually hearing the avian mind here as it listens and acknowledges where the community are up to, and they're playing their part. They've got to be making decisions about, do I follow the same song that everybody else is? Do I introduce a new song? If I hear a new song, do I follow that? How long do I wait before I follow a new song? All these kind of decisions. So you're hearing the avian brain at work. And the other thing that we know about singing birds is that when they sing, they get little floods of happy chemicals in their brains. So they're enjoying themselves. The dawn chorus is heard all around the world. It's a phenomenon of the avian world. It's heard from the far north of America and Europe, right through the tropics to this country. And in thinking about why has the dawn chorus evolved, what is the purpose of the dawn chorus? My understanding is that it is a time of day when birds negotiate their relationships, their most important and fundamental relationships. This is where I live. These are my neighbours. This is the community to which I belong. And in the case of the shrike thrushes, they're doing so in a playful way where you can hear the avian mind making decisions about how it's going to contribute to this collective singing. And they're enjoying themselves doing it. But the most important thing for me is that they are singing, they're negotiating these relationships in a way that doesn't do harm. Now you think about it. I mean, they could do it in a contentious way, but they're not. They're singing. And this really became clear to me in where I live. I'm very fortunate to live in a bushland area. And I go for a walk in the morning, and I often see the wallabies that live in the bush. They're fairly solitary animals, and I think of them as having a quiet demeanour about them. So one morning I was surprised to come across two wallabies having what you'd have to call a dinky die biffo. They were totally going for it. However, I'd like you to just watch closely what these two animals are doing. Firstly, they're facing each other, which exposes their vulnerable underbelly to those sharp claws on their hind feet. Then they're wrapping their forearms around each other's shoulders, which locks them in a configuration. It actually limits their movement a bit. And from there, they're trying to knock the other animal off balance, off its feet. But when they succeed, they wait for the other one to step up. They re-engage before carrying on. And if they get tired, they might take a break until eventually one animal moves off, not to return. And you can see just how exhausting this is. This animal was really puffing hard, and yet when he hops away, he's uninjured. There are resonances of this wallaby's behavior in other animals. Boxing kangaroos, for instance, rabbits and hares have a similar kind of put up your dukes kind of behavior. And the thing about it is, every species on the planet seems to have a ritual, formalized behavior by which they negotiate their status, their access to resources and breeding opportunities and so on, in a way that doesn't do harm. These wallabies do it in quite a physical way. Birds sing. So nature creates safety through what are called agonistic behaviors. And agonistic behavior, this is the biological term for all of these different behaviors that each species seems to exhibit. And I guess the question for me is, in thinking about ourselves and what can we learn from this, what are our agonistic behaviors? Because there are times, well, particularly at this point in world history, where you think we haven't really got any. But it turns out that we do. The difference being that these animals, birds, the way that their singing behavior, these wallabies, they don't go to fight school. They've got it baked into their DNA. They know how to do this. It's a part of their inheritance. And that's what tells you that these agonistic behaviors, these ritualized behaviors, are so important. They're actually a part of their behavioral inheritance. Now, we don't have that. We have to make choices about our agonistic behaviors. And our agonistic behaviors of our species is basically to talk to each other, to dialogue, negotiate, and be honest and open in our talking, and as much as talking, to listen. So it's communication, and it's always working towards trust, building a sense of trust and knowing and understanding amongst each other. This is our way of avoiding contention, of resolving contention without doing harm to each other. So the next one's security. If we think about natural systems and security, we'd think about continuance, about stability, about how life has been on this planet for so many billions of years. And so we might talk about sustainability, I guess is one of our buzzwords. Homeostasis is a lovely word, but it doesn't mean stasis as in static. Homeostasis is a dynamic state. It oscillates around a sort of central, cohesive and sustainable state. So the way that nature achieves this is through cooperation. And this too is something that's audible in the natural world. And it's audible. One of the best examples that I like are mixed species foraging flocks, they're called. And a mixed species foraging flock is an aggregation of different species of birds that will all travel through the environment, through the forest, through the rainforest, as a collective group. And in the tropics, they can be absolutely spectacular. Dozens of species, hundreds of individuals. There's just movement and sound everywhere as they all keep in touch with each other as they move through the forest. But whilst they can be spectacular in the tropics, and my Indian birdwatching friends call them bird waves, which is a lovely term for them. It really kind of captures that sense of just this wave of creatures moving through, wave of birds through the forest. But we have them in this country too, and they're usually smaller aggregations of birds, maybe only a few dozen birds of maybe 8 or 10 species. And here is a recording of one. This is mainly silver-eyes, buff-rumped thornbills, weebills, tree creeper, fairy wrens, scarlet robin, a white-naped honeyeater, and there always seems to be a fantail involved. And what you're hearing here are all the contact calls that maintain the integrity of this foraging flock. So this is an essential cooperation amongst birds. They come together as a flock to forage more efficiently and safely, and they take different roles. Some species are keeping up all these contact calls. Other species have distinct alarm calls and they're quite vigilant. They form their role is as the flock's sentinel. And other species might lead the flock. They're the ones that everybody else follows. But the thing is, this is an essential cooperation that allows birds to forage efficiently and safely. And as with the dawn chorus, it's an avian phenomenon. It is found all around the world in different ways. So cooperation is absolutely vital in the natural world. Wherever you look, you find more and more cooperation and different levels of it. But what I've just played you is a mixed species foraging flock. All of these birds forage in different ways, some of them gleaning in the canopy, some of them sitting near the forest floor, scanning, waiting to pounce on things. Fantails fly out and snatch insects on the wing. The thornbills are on the forest floor, hopping along. They all forage in completely different ways, and yet they come together because it's advantageous to do so. So the big learning, I think, is that cooperation is advantageous across diversity. But let's think about it a little bit further. Cooperation, as I said, is found throughout the animal kingdom and very often amongst very different animals. So not just like birds are all in one sort of large group, but the most diverse and rich marine ecosystems are based on a symbiotic relationship between coral polyps and algae, totally different branches of the web of life. In terrestrial relationships, terrestrial environments rather, about 90% of trees, plants actually, from weeds to redwood trees, have a relationship, an essential relationship with mycorrhizal fungi. Those fungi have a relationship with bacteria that draw nutrients from the soil matrix, and the fungi then pass those nutrients on to the tree. Amongst flowering plants, they have relationships with a great diversity of different pollinators, birds, small mammals, insects, and this is a cassowary poo. You can see all the rainforest seeds and fruits in the cassowary's poo. We think about 200 rainforest plants are require their seeds to go through the digestive tract of a cassowary to germinate. So cassowaries really are essential to having a richer and diverse rainforest. So in all these examples, we are seeing connections between animals right across the web of life from very different branches of the tree of life. So the real lesson, I think, is not only diversity, but the most advantage is gained across radical difference. And I think, for us, we're a very cooperative species. It's easy for us to cooperate. We can even tolerate a certain amount of diversity in our cooperation, different personalities, different skill sets, and so on. That's relatively straightforward. But to cooperate across the radical difference of humanity, of our cultures, our traditions, religions, languages, geopolitics, and so on, that is where the most advantage of us cooperating is. And when we look at the challenges that we have at the moment, whether it's biodiversity loss, climate change, or more social issues around governance and economics, resource use, and so on, cooperating amongst our entire species is necessary. We're simply not going to get on top of these problems acting independently. So the last one to be seen and heard. It was another bird that told me a story that's very relevant to this. As a matter of fact, it taught me what I think of as the most important lesson in how to listen to other creatures. And it was this bird, it's Teresian crow. They're very curious birds, very intelligent birds, problem-solving birds. Some species are tool makers and users. And this one's probably trying to work out what a fork in a fence post is useful for, and I really don't know. But on this occasion, I was recording in the outback, and once again, I put my microphones out, and I'd often find that the crows would come to investigate this strange object in their domain. I would leave the microphones unattended. I'd just turn them on and early in the morning and leave them there right through the dawn, and come back at lunchtime and pick up my rig. And I'd often find that the local crows had come to investigate. But on one morning, a bird did something quite extraordinary. It flew in, it landed a short distance away, it gave half a dozen calls, and then it fluttered down to the ground. You could hear it hopping along until it's right underneath my microphone rig, and then it began vocalizing. I can't tell you how absolutely gobsmacked I was when I first listened to this recording. Because up to that point, I'd been thinking in terms of species and recognizing their vocalizations and finding behavioral associations and so on. This was the first time I realized, and it was quite a shock to me. It really dawned on me that I'm listening to another mind. And it's a mind that lives in the same world that I do. It does it differently, but it's not that different that I can't empathize with it. And I think empathy is really important. It's actually one of our natural senses, if you think about it. It's a natural capacity, instinct, intuition, empathy. And if you extend empathy to another person, particularly somebody that has a very different life experience or beliefs and views, to extend your empathy is, firstly, it's a mark of respect for another person. And secondly, it gives you a true knowing of another person. And that knowing is the beginning of compassion and care for another person. And in our culture, we are so habitually disconnected from the natural world. So to extend our natural sense of empathy to other creatures gives us true knowing of them. And with this crow, maybe it's relatively straightforward. You can hear its sentience, you can hear its curiosity, even its disappointment that nothing to see here, moving along. Other species, it might be more difficult, say frogs calling or insects, but you can still hear their spirit. You can hear their living presence, them giving voice to themselves in the world. And from that comes a knowing of their right to share this beautiful planet with us. So as much as listening with the intellect and being curious about what you're hearing and learning about nature, it's really, really important. But as much as listening with the head is important, this crow also taught me to listen with the heart. And I think as we listen to the world around us, listening with the heart, listening with our instinct and our intuition and our belonging to this place is absolutely vital for us to do, particularly in Western cultures. It's not something that we do naturally. So to be seen and heard is to be in relationship. And for me, this is the most important of these three things, because it really comes down to this idea of deep listening. Deep listening is not just listening to learn about nature. Deep listening is listening to learn from nature, which is a very different consideration. And there are a certain degree of skills in learning how to listen, because in our culture, we're not taught how to do it. So just very, very quickly, I'd suggest that firstly, extend your senses. We're habitually used to filtering the world out because we create such a noisy world. So to actually extend your senses when you're outdoors in the bush, listen as far as you can and in all directions. Develop your sense of listening without filtering. Be curious about what you're hearing. Learn about it. learn to identify species, find out what they're doing, hear those stories, and you need to work out what those stories are. And empathic listening. Being curious is the intellect. Empathy is that more right brain way of listening, and it's just as important. And in the end, allowing yourself to be influenced. This is probably the best way I could describe it. It's being open, vulnerable, allow nature to influence you, to kind of seep its way into your being. Listening is just such a wonderful way of doing this. And, it's not that you're trying to learn something or gain anything, be in a meditative state or anything while you're in nature. It's just be open and allow nature to change you. And from that, everything starts falling into place. So coming back to relationship, the question for me is every organism on this planet, none of them exist in isolation. Every one of them has relationships within the web of life. They all have a place. They all fulfill a function. They all have a purpose. So the question is, what is our role? What is our species' role? And in Western culture, we don't think we've got one. We think that the world is just there for us to take. So it's finding our responsibility, finding our species role, and Indigenous cultures tell us all around the world, tell us that our role is the custodial role, the caring role. It's that we're the only species that can do this, and it's the only thing that we can do as a species that is going to sustain our future. So just very briefly to finish off in summary, safety is generated by agonistic behaviors in the natural world. For us, that means developing trust through communicating openly and honestly. Security is cooperation amongst a diversity of different species, and the more diversity, the more radical difference there is, the more advantage there is in the cooperation. And to be seen and heard is to form relationship, and I think it's the most important one. Without relationship, you can't do the other two. So finding our relationship, finding one's individual relationship, finding your relationship with nature is, I think, deep listening sums it up, whether we're talking about acoustic or something much deeper, more spiritual. And ultimately, we're looking to find our place in this living world. So with that, I will thank you very much and hand back to Michelle.
Thank you so much, Andrew. That was wonderful. As I mentioned, I always enjoy your talks, and listening, particularly to that crow, always makes me laugh because you can really hear his disappointment. You can hear him saying, "What is it? Can I eat it? Can I talk to it? I don't know what it is. I'm getting out of here." Thank you so much for sharing that and your reflections too. So I really want to promote to you all Andrew's website and his book, and I'll pop them into the chat in a moment. We'll come back. Hopefully we will have a bit of time at the end. The format has changed around with some speaking at the beginning and then Andrew, and then we'll come back to Monty and Benny. So I do hope we have some time for questions. But just for now, Andrew, the only other thing I want to mention is I have a highly intelligent red heeler, cattle dog. And when he was in the room, the other birds' noises, he kind of pricked his ears and then went back to snoozing. But when the crow, he actually jumped up, ran up to the computer and was trying to look into the computer. So he was also a sentient being listening to another being, wondering what the heck was going on. So fantastic. Thank you so much, Andrew. Yeah, we'll come back for some more chats in just a moment. Thank you so much. And we're getting some beautiful comments in there. Please do have a look at the comments from folks. Someone actually said same with my dog and the crows. Yeah, terrific. All right. So I will just now ask if Monty and Benny, I'm just going to put your spotlight back up and hand over to you for the next part of your discussion or sharing, whatever you wish, and I'll jump out of the way. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, sorry. I've got a little weird symbol in the bottom corner of my face, which makes it look like I'm on mute, but I don't think I am. People can hear me, can't they?
Loud and clear, Benny. All good.
Oh, well, look, I'd like to add my own thanks to Andrew for that. There were some things there that you said that resonated really strongly with me. I think it falls to me to kind of sum up with a little story that I'm going to tell you, which illustrates to you just how strongly Andrew's assertion that Indigenous cultures for thousands and thousands of years have been talking to us about our custodial role, have been talking to us about what we need to be doing as a human race. Indeed, again, I want to remind everyone that I'm speaking on behalf of myself here. I'm a Jagera man with deep cultural connections to Garrigilu country and Darkinjung country. But I am profoundly uncomfortable with the commonplace understanding that we identify as traditional owners, because I've never been taught that I'm an owner of country. I've been taught that I'm a custodian of country, and I've been taught that I belong to country. I've been taught that I'm one of the youngest who needs to learn the most. But for an Indigenous person practicing the beliefs that Monty and I share, and that our grandfathers, uncles, grandmothers, aunties share, the whole idea of ownership is a really problematic one. And I think that when you look at Andrew's presentation and you see the tremendous life and the way that these creatures have been living their law for thousands of years and continue to do so, you'll understand why for us it is so objectively ridiculous to think that you can own something like that. So as I said, it falls to me to sort of sum up, and I'm going to sum up with a little story which illustrates for me the point that Monty and Andrew and I have been trying to make. And it's a story that comes from sitting in circles. So circle ways of knowing are deeply sacred to Indigenous people, as I'm sure you all know. And when I say Indigenous people, I'm not just talking about Indigenous Australians. I'm talking about, I think that the circle, even though I don't have any research to support this, I would venture that the circle is deeply sacred to all people. The Indigenous people from whatever places that everyone in the room is Indigenous to as well. But the story I'm going to tell you, I'm going to involve you in. And so it's a little bit difficult in an online way, but I'm going to do it the best way that I can, because usually when I do this in circles, sitting on country somewhere, there's a little bit of call and response, but we'll do it the best way we can, hey? So I want you to imagine that you're on this country between 300 and 60,000 years ago. I use those years very deliberately, of course, because they are pre-colonization at a conservative estimate. 60,000 years is more and more becoming the conservative estimate for just how long Aboriginal people have been on this continent. And if you're sitting here with us, you'd have to understand that there were a lot of differences in today's society that didn't matter back then. Black, white, Jagera, Thorable, Jaja, Warang, Wurundjeri, none of those things mattered. The only difference that mattered was boy, man, and girl, woman. And those were all about the journey from childhood to adulthood. And if you weren't initiated, it didn't matter how old you were. You simply were not, if you weren't ready, if you weren't initiated, you were considered a child. So I want you to imagine, once again, that you're sitting on this country and that you're all my grandchildren and Monty's grandchildren. And we've been watching you for a long time from up at our big circle, the grown-up circle, where we sit and we share stories, song, dance, and make important decisions about the way things should go, important decisions that only adults can make. And so we've been watching you, and everyone who's in this room has shown us, and by the way, there's too many people in this room for this to be literal. There'd be much fewer usually, but everyone in this room, for the metaphor and for the story's sake, have shown that they're ready in various ways for the next step of learning. So Monty and I, one day, when you'd be down at the kids' camp, And that night you'd be listening and you'd be aching to get up to that big circle to learn with your grandfathers, with your uncles, with your aunties, with your grandmothers. You'd be aching for it because you're ready for it. And so one day you'd wake up in the morning down at the kids' camp and Monty and I grab you. And we take you away from the other kids who weren't ready for this kind of learning yet onto country. Now, in this metaphor, in this story, Monty and I are your grandfathers. The word in our language for grandfather is damu. And so it would have taken you out all those years ago and we would have sat you down on country. Now, as Andrew and Monty have kind of hinted at in both their conversations here, for us, country was the primary teacher and knowledge holder. As grandfathers and grandmothers, we were the facilitators of knowledge, but country held knowledge. So we'd sit you out, away from the camp, away from the tribe, down under a big eucalyptus tree, and point up in the tree and say, what do you see up there? And one of you would say, Dharma, I see Murrumpy. And Murrumpy's a koala. I said, yep, okay. Well, sit down. You got no permission to speak. Here's your water. We'll be back. And Monty and I would walk away. And we'd leave you there all day. And all you'd be doing is watching Murrumpy. No talking, just watching. The end of that day, we come back. Make sure you're okay. And then I'd say to you, all right, what does Murrumpy teach us about living a good life? And everyone would sit down, and probably unfair for some people. I noticed, and I was impressed by the way just how far flung everyone from the country is. So I don't want to open it to the circle because there's too many of you. But you say things like, it teaches us to go slow, and you'd be right. It teaches us to relax. You'd be right about that as well. But Murrumpy, this little teddy bear looking thing, evolved on the same continent as 10 of the deadliest creatures known to humankind. So you'd think that he has something in his dilly bag, in his little toolkit, that has helped him survive so long. So one of you will put up your hand and say, Damu, Murrumpy looks and listens really well. I say, yeah, that's absolutely right. He does look and listen really well. And then I'd take you back up to the big camp, and that'd be it. So say it was, just because it's a person who's on my screen here, say it was Michelle who told us this. So I'd be watching, and so would Monty. We'd be watching all of you, but particularly Michelle. Is she living Murrumpy? Because it's easy to say the story of Murrumpy, but can she live the story of Murrumpy? Is she looking and listening to the old people, to the kids? Is she looking and listening to her mob? So a little while later, we come and get you early in the morning again, leave all the kids behind and take you out on the country, this time to a big grassland. Sit you down, here's your water. Watch these bunda, kangaroo, that are jumping around out there. I'll leave you all day. Me and Monty be watching. You wouldn't see us, but we'd be watching. Then we come back at the end of the day. What does kangaroo teach us about living a good life? And someone, say Stefan, will put up his hand and say, what I've noticed is that bunda take care of each other. And so that's exactly right, Stefan. Bunda teach us to take care of our mob. When they move all together. When there's danger, they protect each other. Take them off together. So we'll be watching all ears, but particularly Stefan. Is he taking care of his mob? Taking care of those little ones, but also the old people. If his brothers and sisters who he's learning with are a bit sad or a bit down, is he taking care of them too? We take you out again a little while later on. Sit you under a different eucalypt. And this time, point up in the bird. And I know that Andrew would like this one because it's bird. It seems that birds are his thing. I look up, and there's Kookaburra up there. So what does Kookaburra teach us living a good life? And I have a feeling it'd be someone like Andrew who'd say, Damu, Kookaburra laughs. Kookaburra teaches us about joy. And you say, that's absolutely right, Andrew. The Kookaburra does teach us about joy. It teaches us to laugh. So I'd be sitting there, and just on that, just quickly, that lesson from Kookaburra, how important is it for our current society? the most depressed that we've ever been. We have this creature that teaches us to laugh, to enjoy life, that life is meant to be fun and joyous. And it's taught us that for thousands and thousands of years. And so we'd be watching. Is Andrew finding the joy in life? Is he taking himself too seriously? Or is he being joyous? More than that, is he bringing joy to our mob? Is he helping other people find the joy in their lives? Is he living the story of Kookaburra? The final one, which is a bit of a dangerous one, I suppose, but not if you know what you're doing. I'd sit you down around a fire. And I'd ask you to notice when you're sitting around a fire where the dingo sits. And I imagine that there are some people here who spend some time with dingo, and I'll just tell you, the dingo, when you're sitting around a fire, will always sit on the edge of the firelight. Won't come into the light unless he's hungry, and then he'll step in. So a lesson that dingo teaches us is about courage. Who's stepping forward into the light and being seen and being heard when they need to be seen and heard? Who's having the courage to shut up, let other people talk? Courage is an important part of growing up. So we'll be watching you. Who's looking and listening like Murrumbidgee? Who's taking care of the mob like Kangaroo? Who's finding joy like Kookaburra? Who's being courageous like the dingo? You'd go out many, many times and all you'd be doing is watching these creatures, learning their lessons, learning their lore, embedding it in yourself. Then one day, after you'd done this a lot, and you were just about to walk back to the kids' camp, Monty or I come and grab you by the hand. We'd come and take you up to the big circle, sit you down, and you'd sit there with the grown-ups. And that'd be the beginning of your journey into adulthood. So the point of the story that I'm telling you here is that looking and listening to Earthkin, understanding the lessons that they teach us, has been part of Indigenous culture for time immemorial. We are not the masters of nature. We are part of it. We're the youngest brothers and sisters of creation. We have the most to learn. That's what Robin Wall Kimmerer tells us. So it gives me great hope when I meet people like Andrew. Because my people have been practicing this for thousands and thousands of years. But the other really important thing that Monty spoke about with our jumble story right at the beginning is he said, we need to build a relationship with country. If you think about the jumble story, you'll understand why we try and move away from language of connection. Because you are connected. You've got no choice. If you drink water, if you eat food, you're profoundly connected to the place that you inhabit. What we do have a really, really important choice to make about is the kind of relationship we have with country. People like Andrew, they decide to have a positive, caring, loving, nurturing relationship with country, where they position themselves as learners and students. That's consistent with our old way. Too many people choose to see nature and our earthkin as the pretty little backdrop to the unfolding drama of human existence. It's not good enough, and it's not doing anything good for our people. So these messages that Indigenous people have been trying to tell us for thousands and thousands of years, these messages are more important now for a culture that struggles with questions of sustainability than ever before. And like I said, it makes my heart sing, and I know it'll make my grandfathers, my uncles, my grandmothers, my aunties' heart sing, to know that there are people out there who are starting to embrace these lessons. The question for us is how to embed it in a more holistic sense so that everyone gets the benefit of this, not just people who come to these admittedly pretty amazing webinars. I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Benny. Really just a beautiful session listening to you all talk about these stories and to reflect on, I was going to say the word connection, but as you say, we are connected. We're deeply full of nature and part of nature. But thank you. Was Monty going to say anything finally, or we're sort of done to the point where we can just have a yarn now?
Pretty rude of me not to ask, wasn't it? Sorry about that, brother.
No, you're good.
No.
Good moment. It was a good moment.
Thanks, brother.
No, that's wonderful. Well, look, what we might do is I'll bring Andrew into vision. I think he's off grabbing something, but that's okay. I've got a couple of questions just to get the conversation started, and we've got 20 minutes for Q&A, so that's really lovely. And there's already a couple of questions in the chat that I've collected, that Sarah's helped me collect. So here we go. So before we jump into, I guess, some of the more, the deeper questions about listening and learning, I wonder, Benny and Monty, if you have anything you want to promote as courses you run or experiences you share. I've just shared Andrew's website where all of his beautiful recordings are, and also linked to his book and those kinds of things. And we're not just flogging products in a capitalistic way. It's people always come out of our webinars. You know, we're online, we're connecting with each other as best we can, but most people are hungry for more. So do you have anything you'd want to share about stuff you run or do or recommend to others to go and do?
Yeah, sure. Monty, did you want to talk about anything in particular and leave the rest to me?
You want to go first?
Yeah, look, so Monty and I are academics. Monty's finishing up his PhD, and I'm actually a professor at the University of Technology, Sydney. So I was very pleased to hear that colleagues from that group that you mentioned before, the acronym I'm not even going to try for, Michelle.
Yeah, I know, so many letters.
Yeah, that's what being an academic's all about. But yeah, look, so we're academics. What we're really serious about is teacher education. So for us, we embed this knowledge with the permission of our grandfather, Donald Paul Gordon, and the stuff that he's sort of done is the basis for our work. We embed this in teacher education programs, and more we're seeing an appetite to get it embedded in places throughout universities. So our work is mainly taken up designing research projects and then developing literature from those research projects around country as teacher and around getting people out on the country and embedding that practice within Australian schools, because our belief is that that's the point of greatest egress, that if we can train generations of children to be capitalistic and forget about their relationship with country, it stands to reason that we can re-educate them back into a relationship with country. So that's why we want to work in schools and universities.
I love that. I love that. That's a lot of what Ayla does. And sometimes you feel it's not enough, but that sharing and reminding people we can relearn and learn things. Yeah, thank you. That's beautiful. Yeah. And Monty, did you have, yeah.
Yeah, well, I would just, I guess, add to that as a PhD student on that journey, that's what I'm doing, and more specifically within the environmental education space. So I guess, one of the big questions that always with the project that we're working on, or the projects we work on, is how does this keep burning? We use the metaphor of fire and water trickling through country. So we're just, slowly thinking about how we get that whole generational change. So in terms of, if people want to know more, then probably point of call is just sending an email. More than happy just to keep the conversations rolling and keep things going nice and slowly and trickling along.
Beautiful. Thank you. I like that. We often talk about weaving because we find in a colonial legacy country like Australia, the conversations are very diverse, sometimes complex, sometimes difficult, but once you start them, they get better and better. And it's a real weaving of spirit and soul, and also intention, and sometimes work and projects. So thank you so much. I'm going to come to a couple of questions now. I'm going to start with a bird-related question for you, Andrew. Actually, there's a couple of bird-related questions, which I think is a fabulous type of question. Deborah Ma, hello, Deborah, has asked, is it true over time that birds lose their original song because of the demise of their species, and sometimes they have to mix it with other bird songs?
You might be thinking of Regent honeyeaters here, because that seems to be what's happening with them. Birds are like us. They're vocal learners, and we learn our language as infants. Birds learn them as young adolescent birds, and they practice their repertoire in a delightful practice called subsong or whisper song. And you can hear them, when you hear them doing this, it's just such a joy to listen to them running through their repertoire, and lots of mimicry of other species as well, in this quiet little voice, very often in the middle of a bush where they can't be seen. And they reach a point where they've developed their song, and then for a lot of species, they will. It's called close-ended learning. They stop learning and they just retain their song for the rest of their life. Some other species seem to continue learning right throughout their lives. But it's an essential part of particularly songbird repertoires. Other birds maybe inherit their songs, like seabirds and ocean birds, water birds, birds of the night, birds of prey. They all inherit their calls, but songbirds have to learn them. Also, parrots and cockatoos learn them. So, yeah, there's a whole kind of cultural transmission thing going on. And when that doesn't happen, or when there are not enough members of that species to support that, then you end up with a situation that the kind of region honeyeaters are in at the moment. There's only about 300 birds, and they move quite widely across the countryside. And when they start losing their songs because they're so thinly dispersed, it's a real sign that it's like a human culture losing its language. It's a real sign of the demise of that species. Very sad thing. So,
very sad. But you're saying some birds can continue to learn, so they might be picking up
well, birds in
bird
captivity,
words.
captive breeding programs, their carers are playing recordings of the birds so that they can learn their song, and it's working. They're learning their song. They're being released into the wild, and they're singing properly. So there's reason for hope.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you. I know that you've already answered this in the chat with a little response to Nick, but Nick asked a question about recordings and knowledge around the different vocalizations of tawny frogmouths. And I'm interested in the answer too, so do share.
Well, they do something that's characteristic of that whole family, the whole frogmouth family that's found widely throughout Asia and Africa and Australia. And it's low frequency vocalizations that carry really well at night. And so I'm sort of familiar with them in a behavioral sense, but I don't know, Benny, are there any stories of the frogmouth in your tradition?
Look, there really are. And Tawny, as Monty knows, are part of my mob, my very special mob. But I have to admit, I'm fascinated by hearing about this because I didn't know that their vocalizations are particularly. It makes sense, but that they're particularly designed to carry at night. So yeah. Sorry, don't really have much to contribute in that sense. But
I have heard them duetting as well. The male and the female will duet between each other, which is a lot of Australian species duet, which is quite unusual. There's some singing behaviours in this country are really extraordinary, quite unlike the Northern Hemisphere, and it's why a lot of ornithologists, when they came to Australia, they just didn't kind of believe what our birds were doing. But I think a lot of what you're talking about, Benny, and what I've understood from Indigenous cultures comes from the fact that Australian birds live differently to the Northern Hemisphere. They form lifelong pair bonds. They live in communities. They cooperatively breed together as families, as multi-generational families. And this is just not found in the Northern Hemisphere. And I've got this, pardon me for doing this, but there's a little line in my book, which I'd love to share with everybody, because it was just one of those whimsical little ideas that came to me in thinking about the difference between European cultures and Australian Indigenous cultures. And
Andrew, don't forget to turn back to the camera because your mic goes a bit soft.
I will. I'm just looking for it. So I'm reflecting on European cultures and the way that they've, it's all about ownership of land and male dominance and patriarchy and things like that. And I came up with this. I'm reflecting on all this. I'd characterize the culture that emerged from northern lands and in which I've grown up as possessing a self-importance and unhealthy seriousness to it. I wonder whether this has resulted from another circumstance of nature, that northern peoples never had kookaburras to laugh at them, cockatoos and galahs to show them how to play outrageously, and chuffs to remind them of the essential ridiculousness of life.
Yeah. Certainly
love
seem to
that.
be on the same wavelength, don't we?
Yep.
Isn't that wonderful? That is wonderful. We could reflect on some of these learnings for so much longer. I am going to come back to a few more questions from our lovely attendees, though. So I've got a question. I'm going to jump to a question from Matt. Hang on. Oh, gosh, my buttons are playing up. Hang on. There we go. Matt has said, in listening and thinking about what Benny is saying, I am moved to ask, is our connection with land, the natural world where we actually live, dependent on living in and depending on the land? I ask this because we in Western society, in the market economy, are often so distanced from the place or places where we actually live. So is our journey coming to understand that dependent relationship does it actually need living in and experiencing the land? And I'm hoping that I've paraphrased that question, because I see, as a non-Indigenous person, a lot of Western thinking trying to be a problem-solving mechanism for environmental problems without people actually being on country, without people actually putting their feet in the soil, their hands in the dirt, and actually sitting down and listening to country. So I think that's a good question, is our reconnection, for those who feel disconnected with nature, actually needing that biophysical reconnection, or is it something else? What do you think? I'll start with Benny and Monty, but Andrew, you're welcome, obviously, to comment.
So I'll go, and then I might pass my brother as well, just in case there's something going on for you, Monty. Look, for us, the answer is yes. Knowledge, if you think about the story that I shared with you and the story that Monty shared with you, all knowledge was experiential. It's a different way of comprehending the world when you go out and experience it. We weren't into abstract learning, and I'm reminded of the metaphor of the Buddhist metaphor of the finger pointing at the moon, where a Buddhist teacher says to his student, points at the moon and says, "What can you tell me about the moon?" And he tells him about its cycles and about its light and about how it's connected to the tides and how it was once part of the earth, all these kind of things. And the teacher says, yes, all that you've just done is this. All you've done is teach me about the finger pointing at the moon. But if you really want to understand the moon, you've got to go and dance on it. Otherwise, you won't ever know the true nature of the moon. Well, for us, we can't dance on the moon, but we can get out on country. And we should make it a habit. That should be the very first step. We should be getting people to go out and experience the places that they inhabit. I get, and I know that this wasn't from the participant who asked, but in my classes in Canberra, I used to get so frustrated when part of our lessons, our units, were the first step was to get out on country, and we get people come back saying, I don't have time, and I don't have place to get out on country. I live in Canberra. Canberra's 70% national park. And even in Sydney, there are places that you can get to that, we are so fortunate to still have these spaces. So absolutely, you should be going out and experiencing country, and you also shouldn't make excuses for why you can't get out on country. Monty, do you have anything to add to that, brother?
I think what was going on for me, there was a couple of things that our old grandfather Damu talks about. The first one is, testing that knowledge by how deep is your knowledge of country? Do you know where all the food is? Do you know what the role every plant is doing? But like Benny's saying, that's one layer of knowledge. That's that head knowing. But definitely need that embodied in relationship. And like any relationship, you can think about a work colleague. So Benny and I work together. So we're connected. But what makes the relationship strong is sitting down and having coffee every week, sitting down and sharing conversations, sharing our story, listening to each other. And that's what makes the relationship really strong. So I think the best place to start is where you live, because that's part of your story. It's part of who we are. And I've heard we've sat down with a lot of teachers that have spent a lot of time just in their backyards because they have little children. And, you know, recently joining that group with little children, that's part of the story that some of my country time is out there. But you can still watch the cockatoos. Magpie still visits, so do the currawongs, and they're all always sharing stories. So there's always that opportunity to sit, slow down, and build that relationship with all those different earthkin.
Lovely, thank you. And Andrew, you're on mute, just as a reminder. Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No,
look, beautifully said, both of you. And I don't really have all that much to add, except that I often reflect that what we're all talking about is an ancestral capacity that we have, that all our ancestors, white, black, brindle, doesn't matter, our distant ancestors all walked on country, they all listened, they were all immersed in the natural world. And that's how our minds have evolved. They've evolved to make sense of the world around us, the natural world around us. It's what we're surrounded by now that is so baffling and confusing. But when you go back on country, it's like your whole mind can just relax, and then your body relaxes, and then your senses open. So it's a very organic, natural process. It doesn't, you don't have to work hard at it. And I agree with you, Benny, about making excuses. I think a lot of the time it's just because we're unfamiliar with doing it and we're frightened of what we're not familiar with.
And may I suggest,
just,
go Benny.
Sorry, because Andrew just put it beautifully. And can I just make a point that it's a little bit challenging for people, I suppose. The point that Andrew makes about all our ancestors doing this, I completely agree with. But to wit, for people who thought that way, created the most sustainable society the world has ever seen. Thousands and thousands and thousands of years old. Within 200 years, or really 150 years of an industrial education system where we've moved back into cities and where education and government has become centralized, we've brought the world to the brink of economic, environmental, and social collapse. So you'd think that we'd have something to offer. You'd think that we would be listened to, because these ways of being, they're not just good because people like us like to get together in rooms and talk about how beautiful nature is. It's not just beautiful, it's important, it's sacred, and it gave us the lessons that we need to live a sustainable life. So couldn't agree with you more, Andrew, and that's why it's so important to bring these lessons to the fore. Sorry, Michelle, I interrupted you.
No, I love what you said. And look, again, as a non-Indigenous person, I often feel deep despair as I look across. I'll give you an example. This morning, I had the misfortune of going onto LinkedIn to promote one of our conferences. And inside LinkedIn, it's one of the most stressful headspaces you can ever be in. Every second person is designing a new model or a new paper or a new way of explaining something. And as you know, I work very closely with a dear friend, Indigenous elder Mary Graham, and we often say to each other, sort of like, don't we feel like we've written enough now that we can just share with each other and go back on country and listen to country and get on with it? And she tells me a beautiful story that another elder said to her, which is, and I'm not being disrespectful to my people. I love my people. I love all people. But this one really makes me laugh. This Indigenous person said with bemusement, white fellas always seem to be about 3 feet above the ground. Everything's going on up here. You know, and there's that constant feeling of abstraction, the endless abstraction of things and this is why I'm always advocating for people to be thinking about bioregional governance. If you want to play with abstraction, get down and dirty and think about how do we do what First Nations peoples already did and can already show us. Here's one we prepared earlier, a way of governing ourselves by being not just nature is pretty, but exactly, and I love the stories you guys told with dingo and koala, and I was hoping you'd bring up a snake because I really wanted to learn from a snake, but I'll do that another day with you. But that reconnecting, and look, I just want to say to all folks, whether you're in a suburban yard or up in a flat with a pot plant, put your fingers in the soil every day, and everything becomes much clearer. Preferably go out in the bush too, but we're all here. And throughout my 30 years of being a non-Indigenous person talking about earth laws, I've heard so many sad people say, oh, I'm not born here. This isn't my country. I don't really feel connected. And it just really circles back to this idea that if you drink water, if you breathe in and out, and you're bringing oxygen molecules into your body, hey, you are connected, you are here. And now what are you going to do about it? So I'm aware that we've just reached the end of time. Oh, that sounds quite profound. No, I don't want to frighten you. That was a long webinar. Sorry, that sounds so crazy. We have
I was
reached
just
the
about
end of...
to congratulate you for the way that you're putting things. That's beautiful.
until I accidentally did some apocalyptic end of time comment. Sorry, guys. We've reached the end of the time for this webinar, but I seriously can't thank you enough. We've had a beautiful turnout from all of our folks joining us today, and I am personally very grateful to the three of you for sharing and reminding all of us about what I'm sure many of us do every day, which is connect and serve and share and try to be good earthlings on this amazing continent of ours. Benny and Monty, just want to say thank you to you for all your work together, and please keep going. You're both an inspiration, and I hope to reconnect with you again in the future. No doubt I'll harass you via email to come and talk to us again. Thank you for your
Very
time and
happy
for your
to.
sharing. Yeah. And
Thank you so much.
Andrew, who's now a dear friend of mine through our shared love of all this work, thank you for coming online and sharing, the decades of your work through concise stories of how birds perceive our weird technology and other good things. So thank you for sharing today, love.
My great pleasure. Thank you, Michelle. And thank you for all the work that you do. I know it's not always easy for you, but you are a real hub of activity in this country around so many important topics. Thank you.
Oh, you're sweet. Now I'm embarrassed, both about your compliment and my bizarre end of time comment. But on that cheerful note, may I invite you all to turn off the goddamn screens and go running out into your garden with or without clothes. Have a lovely day today. Get dirty and love yous all. Thank you so much. See you soon.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
guys.
Michelle.